Welcome to Illinois Partners. This is Judith at Webinar Central, and I would like to first start by saying my sincere thanks to the Shriver Center for hosting today's webinar on Illinois Partners' behalf, and my special thanks to Sam Tuttle, who is facilitating today's webinar from Heartland. And those of you looking at our screen should be able to see all of our beautiful logos on the PowerPoint. Again, my thanks to everybody. For some housekeeping, just want to remind everybody that you can type in your questions, and we will be monitoring those questions. And shortly when Sam gets started, she's going to be doing some polling and questioning of you for the purposes of gaining knowledge on who's on the call. So if you would please look at your polling buttons, and when the time comes, answer those questions, we would be very, very grateful. So for just some real brief, kind of updates, we are continuing to track bills that have been submitted and are monitoring those on your behalf. And a couple of key bills of note would be House Bill 2. We mentioned this on our call a couple of weeks ago. That is sponsored by Representative Bellock in the Senate. We have a couple of bills, one specifically by Senator Sandoval. And also, we are closely watching and supporting the Medicaid expansion bill. So just keep tuned to us. And as always, if you have any specific questions of me, Judith at illinoispartners.org. We will be making available the PowerPoint on the Illinois Partners website. Give us a couple of days after today for you, and for you that want to ask that question, will these slides be available? The answer is yes. It'll take us a couple of days for us to get it up on the website, but do know that they will be. And with that being said, I'd like to turn it over, and again, my thanks to Sam for facilitating and teaching us today on the Illinois Partners Legislator Engagement Webinar.
Thank you so much, Judith. Again, my name is Sam Tuttle. I'm with the Heartland Alliance for Human Needs and Human Rights. Today we're going to focus on two specific aspects of legislative engagement, the in-district meeting and site visits, which are really the deepest way that you can engage and build a relationship with your legislator. I do want to remind everyone that there is a question and answer box on your screen. If you'd please use that, we're going to try to leave ample time at the end of the webinar for questions and for a question and answer period, and it will help us a lot if you use that as your questions come up. If you'll turn to the first slide, you'll see we discuss a little bit of the background about legislative advocacy. Our hope as Illinois Partners members is that you will engage with your legislators. You are in the best position to influence your legislators as a constituent, as an employer in the community, as someone who is, in fact, an expert in your area. Telling your story can help show legislators the true impact of the laws that they make and the budgets that they pass. Particularly for new legislators, coming into office can be overwhelming. There's a lot of information that they need to learn, and if they are not familiar with the human services sector, you can be the face of that sector for legislators and help them understand with depth the importance of human services in their community and for the state. And legislators rely on constituent stories like yours to make decisions. For those of us who spend a lot of time in Springfield, and Judith and Suzanne, Jack can tell you this, oftentimes legislators will, during a committee hearing, say, I heard from a constituent, and they tell me X. That story affects their vote, and it also helps them influence other legislators while they are doing the work of the General Assembly. If we could do the first poll now. Excuse me. I'll read the question. This question asks about if you know who your legislator is in your district. Please answer yes or no. As you fill out the poll, I'll briefly discuss when you should engage with your legislator. You don't need to wait until a specific bill is under consideration or you hear from Judith or any of your other connections that action is needed. You can develop this relationship long before anything in particular comes up. You should also think about building relationships with legislative staff members when those staff members are integral to the work of your legislator. This can help increase your access and also help make sure that you can create opportunities for more input when the legislator may have a tight schedule. Okay. And it looks like a good chunk of you, 90%, know who your legislators are. That is fantastic. In addition to building a relationship with your legislator, we ask that you also spend some time building relationships within your local community. Develop long-term relationships with community leaders and share with your local leaders the benefits of your cause and encourage them to help promote it wherever possible. This helps create an echo chamber in your community about issues that affect the human services section and your sector and your program in general. It means that when decision makers are talking with local leaders that they hopefully will hear more about the issue that you've brought to them. We also encourage, as a part of this work, that you create local councils with other programs in your community. And we do want to offer Illinois Partners as a means to connect you with a network of other community members. We'll talk about that a little bit more going forward. But oftentimes building those relationships and speaking with one voice can be very influential on your local legislators because they recognize that there's more than one program or one individual who is affected by the decisions that they make. There are several different types of legislative advocacy. The first one that we will be discussing today in some depth are in-district meetings. And these are meetings with your legislator in their local office. So every legislator has two offices, a Springfield office, and they have an assistant in Springfield, and a local office where they also take meetings in their district. Today's discussion will focus primarily on meetings within the district. In addition to meeting your legislators at in-district meetings, we also encourage members to invite legislators to site visits, to invite legislators to come visit your programs, see what you do, and learn about the value of the programs and services that you provide in the community. We'll also at the end touch briefly on phone and email advocacy and lobby days. If Illinois Partners has a lobby day, we will work with you to train you on the day of the lobby day, so we aren't going to spend a ton of time on what that looks like. If we can do the second polling question now, which is about whether you have met with your legislator in the last 2 years in districts. As you fill out the poll, think about people who you might invite to your in-district meeting besides yourself or your program. Oftentimes bringing allies or other community members or a participant who you serve may help with the may help the legislator understand the issues that you're bringing to them. If you are already part of a local council, as we discussed before, think about bringing members of the local council with you and connecting them with the council itself. If you aren't a part of the local council, which is a group of providers in the area, and would like to think about creating one, please contact Illinois Partners. We have resources for you and can help handhold through the process of developing a local council. In addition, if you simply want to know more about the network of providers in your area and who might benefit from a legislative meeting to bring a number of people to the legislator's attention, please give us a call and we can help connect you with others in the area. And think about excuse me. I'm getting a little signal that we should share the poll results. So I'm just taking a look at the poll. It looks like almost 70% of folks have met with legislators in the last 2 years, which is great, and about a third of you have not. Our hope is after this meeting, everybody will be scheduling a meeting with their legislator, whether it's an in-district meeting or a site visit. So that we have those exciting polls out of the way, let's talk a little bit about meeting basics. Some of this many of you already know, particularly because so many of you have already had legislative meetings, but it's worthwhile to remind ourselves of the steps of setting up a meeting. In terms of scheduling a meeting, you should contact your legislator well in advance, especially if it's during the legislative session. Oftentimes legislators are scheduling meetings. In fact, I heard a story today about a legislator who was scheduling a meeting at the end of March. And so if you want to be able to connect with your legislator during this time, the sooner that you contact their office to schedule a meeting, the better. When you contact the office, you should be ready to share who will be coming to the meeting, any dates of availability, your contact information, and the topic of the meeting. If it's an introductory meeting, you can simply say our interest as a provider in the budget, our developing a relationship with the legislator, human services in Illinois, but the legislator will want to know generally what the meeting is about before the meeting. Be prepared when you attend meetings that these meetings may be as little as 15 minutes or 30 minutes. You may not have a lot of time. So as we walk through the meeting, we'll talk about how to use the time wisely and what sort of materials you should have available to leave behind so that even if you have a short period of time with the legislator, they are reminded of your presence and your role in the community. Remember to call and confirm about a week before the meeting. And if you have a hard time figuring out who your legislator is or how to contact them, please visit our website and we can help connect you with that information. www.illinoispartners.org. Before you attend a meeting with a legislator, especially if this is your first meeting with a new legislator, take some time to learn about your senator or representative. What is his or her background? Maybe they have a background in human services, or you have a similar background. That will help introduce the story that you're going to tell or the message that you're going to bring to them. Also, take a look to see what committees he or she is serving on within the legislature, and we can also help connect you with that information and walk you through how to get that information. But oftentimes, if somebody's on Human Services, the Human Services Committee, that is a nice way to open the door and a conversation about human services in Illinois. And although sometimes it's difficult, if you know what issue areas he or she cares about, it's important to know that going into the meeting because, again, it will help connect what you're talking about to what they care about and make that link. Before going to a meeting, you should also put together an advocacy toolkit, really a packet of information that you bring to your meeting. And when I say packet, that's a little bit misleading. You should have only a few materials and they should be easily digestible. But there are some things that you really ought to bring to each and every meeting. You should bring materials about your organization and your organization's expertise. Oftentimes we forget that we in fact are experts in human services. We, the providers, are the experts on the issues that decision makers are weighing in on in terms of budgeting or lawmaking. And so if you bring information that not only explains what your organization is but helps highlight your expertise, you will be able to situate yourself as a resource for the legislator as things come up in the General Assembly. Ideally, each one of us want to be the organization where when a legislator has a question about human services, they think, I know a program I can call. I can try to figure out what the experience is on the ground. The more information you can provide about what resource you can be to legislators, the more likely you are to get that call. And we'll talk a little bit about how to end a meeting to play this up in the middle of the webinar. In addition, if you're talking about a specific issue, bring fact sheets or similar materials related to that issue. Oftentimes, Illinois partners will have, for example, a fact sheet and also an FAQ for legislators that can help explain the issue that we are asking everybody to talk to their legislator about. But if you are creating your own materials, keep them brief. Simple one-page handouts are best. For those of you who were on the last member call with Senator Morrison, she made very clear a long report is hard for her to read through and get to with the amount on her plate, but a single one-page handout allows her to take in the information that you're bringing to her and remember the issue. In addition, Illinois Partners for each and every district has a fact sheet that outlines who the human service providers are in each legislator's district. We encourage you to contact Judith and bring those fact sheets to your meetings. We believe that legislators need to know the number of programs that they have in their district and connect those programs to the decisions that they're making. And this way, your legislative meeting can also be a broader-based meeting for all those providers in your district. You should also bring notes and talking points for your own use so that you're prepared for the meeting and can stay on track. Particularly, as we talked about, if you only have a short period of time, it's important to remain focused on your message to use that time wisely. So what are talking points? In general, talking points are a tool for you to stay on track during the meeting and ensure that you have a clear message. It sounds simple enough, but oftentimes when we're in a conversation with legislators, they'll ask us a question, we'll start chatting, and we'll lose track of exactly what we need to say. Also, with difficult messages, sometimes it's hard to remember how you want to frame your issue or present your issue to your legislator unless it's written down in front of you. So talking points help keep your message consistent with everybody else who's having those meetings. They help frame your issue more clearly and concisely, making sure that we're presenting our information with a unified voice. As you are likely aware, Illinois Partners develops talking points on specific issues throughout the legislative session when we ask folks to make appointments with legislators. And so please check the website, and we will oftentimes have sample talking points that you can use on pressing issues. Know that talking points are not meant to be read word for word, and you may not want to read them at all, although if you get nervous, there's nothing wrong with reading your talking points. But they can also be a good core for your conversation. Start your conversation with your talking point and work off from there. They are an internal product. They should not be shared with legislators as a document. They are not a fact sheet. The other thing is, if you're going into a meeting, particularly a meeting that's a first one with a new legislator and you're developing a relationship, feel free to create your own talking points. They're a way to focus your message and keep you on track, as well as using the talking points of Illinois Partners or other advocacy organizations that you might be affiliated with. And if you have a hard time developing talking points, please contact us. We're willing to help work those conversations out so that your message is consistent with other folks in your area and connect you with those folks. On the day of the meeting, make sure to be prompt and arrive early. Oftentimes legislators are running late, or they're running early, or they ask you to come a half an hour earlier or 20 minutes later. It's important to carve out some time around that meeting, given their ever-changing schedule, so that you're still able to participate in a meeting even if their schedule changes. And as you come into the meeting, before you begin, hand out your fact sheets and your business cards. That way, if everything is cut off, everybody already has that information. They know who they are talking to, and they can be looking at those materials as you're discussing your issues with the legislator. During the meeting, stick to your talking points and make sure there's only one or two issues. Oftentimes, I certainly have a laundry list of issues that I would love to talk to each and every legislator that I meet with. But in order to make sure that the most pressing messages that I'm coming to them with remain at the top of their brain, it's best to limit to one or two key issues, especially given that we hope that you will be building long-term relationships with your legislators. There's often time to revisit those other issues at later dates, and oftentimes those are long-term issues. So pick your top two issues, keep to those, prepare your talking points for those. And even though I'm probably having a very hard time speaking slowly right now, try to speak slowly and clearly with your legislator. It is hard in meetings not to rush through the information, particularly when we do come well prepared with talking points and want to make sure we hit everything. Take a breath, have a little conversation with yourself about what you're going to say beforehand, and be prepared to speak slowly and work your way through the meeting. Be sure to emphasize your organization, the number of staff and people you serve, and your organization's role in the community. As we discussed at the beginning, as a constituent for your legislator, you have enormous power to bring them information. And that's amplified when they can understand the role of your program within the community. Then they understand how your staff relates to them, that participants are also their constituents, and that you are vital to making sure that their community remains healthy. You should feel free to have an open and honest discussion of issues with the legislator, but be careful not to argue, which frankly is a little bit difficult for me sometimes. And don't make demands. Oftentimes, again, as you're developing a relationship, there is an opportunity to come back and continue to educate your legislator. In lieu of making specific demands, we recommend that you make asks of your legislator and follow up with additional information that will educate them and try to bring them along our path in terms of the issues that we are discussing with legislators. An important part of any meeting is the part where you tell your story. Unlike lobbyists or interest groups, the story of a provider in the community or a participant in any community program is completely different. And it is grounded in reality. It gives legislators a picture of what their district is experiencing, and it gives a human face to the issues and to the human service sector. And so we ask that almost every meeting that you have, that you think about how can you present your story, how can you bring these talking points, which may be very specific asks, down to a personal story about your program or the people that you work with. On the next slide, we provide a number of questions. I'm not going to talk about all of them that you should ask yourself when telling your story. But I want to point out a couple. Oftentimes we ask folks, talk about what these cuts have meant for your program. And for almost every program, they have that story. But you can also think about other ways to tell your story. Have you been unable to serve your participants by referring them to, for example, employment and training programs because that program has been cut? Has the effectiveness of your ability to work within your community to improve the lives of participants been affected by cuts? There are many different ways that you can tell a story that's compelling and that gives the legislator insight into what their decisions mean at the community level. We also ask that you think about telling the story of the individuals that you serve as a part of telling your story when it's appropriate and connects with the issues that you're talking about. That said, keep your story brief. A short, compelling story is more effective than a long, detailed story. An important thing to remember is that sometimes what is most compelling to us as providers, as people within our world, is not necessarily the most compelling story for your legislator. So you should ask yourself, is the story that I'm going to tell going to require a whole lot of background information? Do I need to explain X, Y, and Z before I can get to the point of the story? And will somebody outside of my world, if I were walking up to a stranger who knows nothing about anything, understand what I'm saying in a compelling way? And so oftentimes when we go to legislative meetings, we're not in a position to tell the story that really is the most pressing kind of story or the most disturbing story that we have in terms of what's happened to our program. It needs to be the one that is most translatable to someone who may not understand the details of our program. And finally, think about connecting your story to the talking points, to the issues that you came to in the meeting, and also the impact on your community. Again, the more that your story can be amplified within your community, the more that that story will continue to linger in the mind of the legislator. One way to think about that is simply what is your program's role within the community? Has it changed in terms of jobs, economic impact? Is there a way to connect what has happened, again, to every other provider or employer in the community? Finally, as you wrap up your meeting, we ask that you end with some sort of hook. If you have asked for the meeting because you have a specific ask, don't cut human services or vote yes on X bill. We ask that you end the meeting by restating if you've already asked, or making that ask clearly to your legislators so that they have no question why you were meeting with them and what you wanted. If it's a relational meeting, if the ask doesn't seem to be appropriate given the subject matter or the issues that you're in the meeting, oftentimes we suggest that's a good opportunity to invite legislators for a site visit, to continue to educate them about your program. Or, and this is very important, and I often end meetings with legislators like this, offer to provide continued information to the legislator and ask them to use you as an expert as they unpack these issues. Sometimes the most effective influence that we can have is to be the entity that a legislator will call when they have a specific question about an issue. So, for example, Heartland Alliance provides homeless prevention programs, and my hope is that after I meet with many legislators that they will return to us and ask us questions if facing them in the legislature is a question about homeless prevention. Then we can frame the issue for the legislator and they can understand the importance of the program from the get-go. And again, this is why we asked you to bring materials about your expertise. Think about providing those materials also in electronic form after the meeting. Finishing up with what not to do in a meeting. Although we encourage folks to connect with their local councils and a network of providers, also be cognizant that it can be overwhelming to meet with a large group of people. So think about a handful of people, 3 people, 4 people. Anything more than that can be really disarming for a legislator because it's hard to know who to focus on and to distinguish between the people who are talking to you. Be sure to come to the meeting prepared. If you come unsure about what you want to discuss, the legislator will probably get a little bit impatient and you will miss the opportunity to really drive home the importance of your program. Again, keep materials to a few pages total, and those pages should be simple and easily comprehensible so that when the legislator looks back at them a week or two later, they can understand what you were presenting and are reminded of the meeting. And this is very important. Don't feel that having a meeting with a legislator means that you need to have all the answers, especially on issues related to the human services sector. Please feel free to say, I don't know, and to offer that Illinois partners can follow up with more information. We are happy to circle back with legislators and help them understand an issue in more depth. And so we hope that you know that it's perfectly acceptable to tell a legislator you don't know the answer to the question and to offer up Illinois partners or other folks in your community, if you know somebody else who can help answer that question as well, as an alternative to provide that follow-up. After a meeting, send a thank you note and any follow-up information that the legislator may have asked for. It's very common that a legislator will ask for some more detail, particularly if you're talking about a specific issue. And so if you can follow up with that information within a couple of days, certainly within a week, it will help create that expertise relationship with a legislator so that they come back to you and help make sure that they don't linger too long trying to find information from another source. It helps solidify your relationship with the legislator. And circle back with Illinois partners. Let us know what happened at the meeting. Is there any insight? Should we be following up with legislators after the meeting? Can we be of help? Also think about providing routine updates for legislators about your organization's programs or participants. This helps keep your program at the front of your legislator's mind and helps develop that echo chamber in terms of information regarding human services. And as new information arises that relates to your meeting and what you talk to your legislator about, feel free to share that information with the legislator or their staff. Continue that circle of information so that they are always looking to your program as an example. So let's do the next poll, the final poll, regarding site visit. As we move into this site visit section, this is a visit where a legislator has come to your particular program. We really encourage members to have site visits. It's the best way to make an impression on a legislator and educate them about your program. And it looks like we're getting close to the end, and over 75% of the members on this call have had site visits. That is wonderful, and we hope you continue to do that. It's an amazing number. Site visits are effective because it's a first-hand account for a legislator with their own eyes about what your program does and what the role is in the community. And it helps them visualize the importance of the laws and the budgets that they make. When you think about setting up a site visit, think about setting up ways for participants and staff to interact with the legislator and tell them about what your program or policy means to them. I was recently at a site visit with a senator where some of our participants were able to speak with the senator about the issue of criminal records. And a couple of us were also there, and it led directly into a conversation about policy related to individuals with criminal records. And so bringing kind of people's individual stories easily lend to connections on the issues that mean the most to you. Continuing to think about what happens at a site visit. Most of the basic rules that we talked about remain the same. Having an advocacy toolkit with materials, preparing talking points, and telling your story. But the great thing about a site visit, besides giving that face to an issue or a program or a budget line item, is that there's an opportunity to incorporate small stories into your site visit. So I provided an example here. If you're walking through, let's say, a residential program, and you have an office that used to have a case manager in them, but it's not used for that anymore because of cuts, you should tell your legislator that story as a part of the tour. And think about different places where you can tell mini stories throughout your tour and your site visit that circle back to the primary issues in your conversations with legislators. As we wrap up here, we want to make sure that there's plenty of time for questions. I did just want to briefly talk about a couple of other forms of advocacy with legislators. The first are action alerts. Oftentimes, if you're on a listserv with different advocacy groups, Illinois Partners, other groups, you get action alerts asking you to email or call your legislator. That is a very issue-specific type of advocacy, and if those issues mean something to you, by all means, you should participate. Same thing with phone call or email contact with legislators. Sometimes placing a phone call in saying, we have concerns with this bill can make a big difference coming from a constituent. And so if your time is limited, if you're having a hard time getting a meeting on when issues are moving quickly, think about making a phone call or sending an email to your legislator. This is also why developing that long-term relationship is important, because then a simple phone call makes a lot more sense as issues pop up. And then occasionally, advocacy organizations and Illinois Partners will have lobby days, or days when members come to Springfield and we try to move a message very quickly throughout the building in all the Springfield offices of legislators. Please know that if Illinois Partners has a lobby day, that we will do a training with you the same day and provide you with materials ahead of time so that you are prepared for that site visit. And if those happen, please pay attention in the member calls and on the website, and we'll try to connect everybody with the materials that they need. Lastly, there are a number of useful tools from Illinois Partners on the website. So please look at illinoispartners.org. We do have there oftentimes sample letters to the editor, sample fact sheets, talking points, FAQs, other advocacy materials. We also have basic information and handouts, and we certainly hope that you will use these in your upcoming meetings. What are human services? What is Illinois Partners? And introducing them to Illinois Partners for Human Services so that we can amplify our voice as a human service sector throughout Illinois. Also, we do have a summary of advocacy and lobbying guidelines online, so if you have questions about how to approach advocacy and what those rules are, please look there. And we'll continue to feed information and resources to the website throughout the year, and specifically throughout the legislative session. I think now we're at the point where we can take questions. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'm not quite sure what the first question is.
Where can I get information about?
Okay. So if you look at illinoispartners.org on the quick links, you can get information about, the question was, where can I get information about who the legislators are in my district or other districts? And you can get those online at illinoispartners.org in the quick links section. I'm sorry, I forgot to repeat the question. The next question is about where the materials will be. We will put those materials online on Illinois Partners, I think Judith said, in a couple of days. And we will also connect those materials to the sample materials that we discussed today, the one-pager regarding Illinois Partners, so that you can easily identify where that information is. So I think there's a question about, in terms of follow-ups, is it better to call and thank staff, email, or send an actual letter? I think it depends on what you're providing in terms of follow-up. If it's a simple thank you, I think a thank you note is nice. I've seen legislators post those on their desks and their bulletin boards. If you're providing additional information, oftentimes email is best, because then you can attach that information in an easily usable form that they can forward to staff or other people who might use that information. So if it's the number of program participants, if it's information from Illinois partners, email is probably best. Phone calls, I think, are most appropriate when you're following up to discuss a certain issue, but if you're simply providing information, Illinois or email is probably the best.
So how best to deal with somebody who's not necessarily on your side of the issue? How best to deal with maybe not someone who's all, warm and fuzzy and excited about what you deliver in services? How do you handle a legislator like that?
I think it depends on the situation and the personality of the legislator, but there are a couple of things that you can do. Say things like, I recognize that you disagree with me, but I want you to understand my programming so that when I continue to come back and talk to you, that you have a sense of the work that we do. Again, this might be a good opportunity to say that we'd like to connect you with Illinois partners, particularly if a legislator is more difficult and you're concerned that you're not quite sure how to deal with them. Please feel free to say, I hear you on that issue. We disagree. What I'd like to do is have Illinois partners follow up with more information and to talk to you about this issue. That's often a nice way to exit the room and still maintain that information and get the follow-up so that they continue to recognize your program, but that will allow us to put together that more detailed information to help the legislator deal with whatever their pushback may be.
And I think one of the things that I would add to that, Sam, is that when we find a legislator like that, it's helpful to know who that legislator is and then kind of identify who are the other human service providers in that legislator's district so that we can have a strategic approach on behalf of all the families that are being served in that district so that we can, figure out, again, how to make them friend rather than foe, or at least neutralize them, I should suggest. Maybe we can't make them a friend. That leads to a question, Sam, about, how do you deal with the legislator who says, I'm powerless, I can't do anything, it's not up to me, I'm just a legislator, great asks, love your program, think you guys do terrific work, but you know what? I've got no power in Springfield, really sorry.
I think the answer is, but you have a vote, and we hope that you vote with us. Oftentimes legislators, and I think the General Assembly in general feels like they're paralyzed by the current budget crisis. But it is important to continue making the ask and make that ask clear and follow up with an ask every opportunity. So if they say, I'm powerless today, the next time there's a vote, come back to them, make the ask again. Part of our role is to educate legislators on the important role that they can play in human services. And so they may feel powerless, but it is our job to continue to remind them that they have a vote on these issues and a voice, and we ask them to use it whether they feel like they're the most powerful person in Springfield or the least powerful person in Springfield.
If not having the time to do a visit, like not having a time to do a site visit, are there other effective means of being able to engage with a legislator so that is it an email, is it a fax, is it a phone call? In other words, how can we still let a legislator know that we exist in their district and the families that we serve in their district, the people that we employ in their district?
Certainly, emails and phone calls, particularly on specific issues. We know that legislators track phone calls for or against certain bills. We understand that there may be a new system coming to the General Assembly, although I'm not certain about this, where they're doing the similar tracking on emails, proponents or opponents to a particular bill or policy, and so those phone calls and emails do make a difference. They go in the overall picture for the legislator of where their constituents have concerns. The other thing that we've done, and I've done this myself, and I know the Shriver Center does this, is sending a letter that tells a story as well, particularly when an issue is in committee. That will allow a committee member to say, I got a letter, and this is the story of somebody in my community, and use that story as they try to move the issue forward. So if you don't have the opportunity for a meeting, please think about either writing a longer letter with information about your program and a story about how whatever issue is affecting your program, and if there's a particular vote, to really think about reaching out by email or telephone to talk about the impact of policies on your program.
So a couple of questions, relative to asks. So we talk about making an ask, whether it's supporting an issue or supporting a bill or supporting a legislation, and the question is it ever too much to have too many people asking or supporting or opposing something with a legislator? Is it ever too much?
I don't think it's ever too much in terms of contact. I think the more individuals on an issue, as much as a staff person, I've personally been told, we've heard enough, we keep getting these phone calls, I know what your issue is. But I think that educates the General Assembly in general how important an issue is. That said, within a meeting, you might sometimes want to just exit a meeting rather than going back and trying to get a yes or specific information. It is important to be consistent in contacting your legislators, but also respectful with the legislators themselves. So I think in terms of number of phone calls, if we can get, as many providers to make a phone call as possible, that is always effective. Within individual meetings, sometimes it's important to maintain that relationship, so think about how to exit gracefully if you disagree.
So I just want to amplify that, Sam. I find in almost all of the legislator meetings that I have, when asking the legislator the question about having heard from their in-district human service providers, I would say almost to 100%, they do not hear from this sector, the human service sector, as much as they do other sectors as frequently. And so I think in our case right now, as we're trying to ramp up and make sure that our issues are heard, we could never be too shy about having as many folks as we can call. And I would like to just add that it doesn't have to be the staff of a not-for-profit that makes the calls. It could be members of your board of directors that make the calls. It could be volunteers that work with you. It could be constituents that you are engaged with, clients that you're engaged with. But I think the more diversity we have in letting the legislator know about the great work you do in your district and the importance of the work you do is really key. Sam, another question. How can non-English speaking people, how can non-English speaking constituents make an impact?
I think it depends on the legislature. I'm not fully apprised, and we can try to get more information out to folks about whether there are any limited English proficiency programs that the state has in terms of contacting legislators across the board. I know for a number of legislators they do have non-native English-speaking staff, and so you might have somebody who speaks Spanish or Polish in the office who's able to take that information. Also think about helping with that phone call. Calling with somebody if they are not a native English speaker and helping them through the call and get that information across. But certainly Illinois Partners will look into whether there's a way that we can connect people who do not speak English or are not comfortable making a phone call in English with their legislators.
So, Sam, the question is about reaching out to the other side with your ask. Instead of just always asking the legislator to support the constituents, but also asking them to contact the leadership of the other chamber. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's oftentimes important to ask legislators to contact leadership in their respective caucus. So the way this works is that, as most of you know, that both the House and the Senate have Democratic leadership and Republican leadership. And oftentimes, when leadership prioritize certain issues, those issues get more traction in Springfield. And so one of the asks we often make of legislators, particularly if there's a specific issue you're coming to them about, is can you take this back to your leadership and ask this be prioritized? Also, when you make an ask like that, you'll oftentimes get feedback from the legislator. And if those are on issues related to human services, we ask that you share that information with Illinois partners so we can better assess where leadership is on our issues and continue to connect people with leadership on specific issues.
A lot of the asks that we do are budget related, right? Like, yes, don't cut our funding or pay us. I like the pay us one particularly. And so a lot of the questions that we ask, right, are related to budget. And that can get kind of caught up as in contrast to questions about policy. You know, how do you, again, stay kind of focused on that, of which is the policy side, and not get all caught up on the budget side and then get kind of
vice versa? Right. So that's part of the reason to have talking points and make sure that you're following your script, but also I think that there are really graceful ways to change a conversation back. So this is difficult, I think, for all of us who care about our issues, especially when engaging with a legislator. They'll bring something up. It is interesting to us. We want to respond. But if your issue there is budget cuts or your issue there is debt restructuring, think about how to bring the conversation back. I'm really interested in talking to you about this. I'd like to set up another meeting, but I really want today to get your sense on this issue. And practice that. Those are hard conversations to have. So if you are in a local council or going with a network with some other folks in your community, among that group, you can have someone who's responsible for making sure that that comes back to your issue and help work with them to rein everybody in, including oftentimes ourselves, because we're interested in these issues. So it's nice to have somebody who's responsible for making sure that that message comes back to where it ought to be.
And I think it's really important. I was just in some meetings the end of last week that were actually, this was a conversation, was truly about the budget. A number of providers talking about having not been paid since July 1st for the services that they've delivered since July 1st. And how do you continue to get people to understand the importance of not getting paid, and how that drumbeat may seem like it's old and therefore people aren't listening anymore, and then contrast that to the issues about policy. And as you're all keenly aware, we're about to get unveiled to us the governor's budget address and what he's going to prioritize in terms of the next year's budget. Subsequently hearing what's going to happen by the General Assembly and how they are going to construct their budget, which has had more relevance in the last couple of years than the governor's budget address has in terms of the actual outcome of what budgets we've seen. But I think now more than ever, I would really like to encourage people to make appointments with their legislators. Please go on the website, on Illinois Partners website, and you will see the General Assembly dates of when they're in session and when they're on break. And if you can start making calls today to set up appointments when they're on spring break, that would be wonderful. It may seem like 6 weeks is a long time from now, but you guys, 6 weeks flies by, and it'll sometimes take a long time just to get the meetings confirmed with the legislator. So anything that you're able to do starting now to get those meetings in district secured would be of real help, and I would just ask a personal favor that when you do have these meetings that you circle back and let us know who you've met with and what you're hearing on the ground is from legislators around the state, because it definitely helps impact us and impact our advocacy work when we can hear from around the state how various legislators are talking about our issues. Michelle, I don't think I see any other questions, and I know we're getting close to 3 o'clock. So in closing, I just, again, want to remind you, please, 2 things that are important. One is our story collection. Grateful to have your stories. Let me know what's happening out in your organization. And secondly, making those calls to meet with your in-district legislators. Go to our website. You'll see the list of the legislators with their phone numbers and email addresses, both in district as well as in their Springfield office. I want to, again, please say thank you to Sam for today's presentation. It had a tremendous amount of information that I'm hoping you'll begin using right away. And my second thanks to the Shriver Center, Michelle, for helping us do the technology, helping us make this happen the weeks and weeks leading up to today. Obviously, people don't get to see or know about, but we're really grateful for. And as always, my thanks to each of you for participating. Judith at illinoispartners.org for any questions or comments or feedback. And within the next couple days, we will get this PowerPoint up, webinar up on our website. So again,